Well, I used to work, as you may know, as a special advisor in government for 3.5 years, and for about 3 of those years I worked with a brilliant man, great man, best boss I've ever had, called James Brokenshire. Now, James is no longer with us. He died of lung cancer in 2021, and it was interesting because I was managing his media at the time, and part of that was, part of the time I was working with him, part of the time I wasn't working with him. When he had cancer, it went away, then it came back. But one person I got to know very well, not just because I was working with James, and who I now consider a very, very close friend, is Cathy, his wife, Cathy Brokenshire, who joins me now. And I was chatting to Cathy on WhatsApp last night, as we often do. We met up last week. And I was just thinking, actually, hold on a second. In terms of someone who's public facing, yes, James was a politician, he was a cabinet minister, he was Northern Ireland Secretary, Housing Secretary. He wasn't as well known, of course, as one of the most famous women in the world, Princess Kate, but nonetheless it was very, very, very public when he had the very personal aspect of having cancer, being diagnosed a couple of times with it. So Cathy's with me now, and I'm really glad that she's agreed to do this interview. Cathy, thanks for joining me this morning.
Not at all. Morning.
I suppose the question I have is for you as James's, ran his life basically, and were his wonderful, wonderful wife, mother of his 3 brilliant kids. You were someone who had to deal with this as well. It wasn't something that you had asked for at all. You'd made a decision together for James to go into politics, but then people sort of thought they knew him, but actually they didn't. And then there were people who really did know him, who wanted to be nice about it. But presumably the public eye aspect of this actually adds another layer of stress and worry in regard to, this horrible diagnosis.
Yeah, totally. It's you get that shocking diagnosis, and you first of all, you have a whole round of tests, and then you have to go home and wait for all the results to come through. And for us, we went off to the hospital to find out those said results. And because James was Northern Ireland Secretary at the time, he had police officers and protection. So we were driven up to the hospital, went in to see the oncologist, and was told the devastating news that, yes, he had lung cancer. However, it was going to be treatable, and what the prognoses were and the course of action. And we walked out of that consultation, and immediately outside the door were protection officers to escort us out of the building and take us home. So we then sat in a car for an hour, not really being able to actually discuss that news, and obviously in shock. We then actually had to then go and do the school run, and because there wasn't time for James to be dropped home, we actually did that again with the protection officers and collected up all the 3 kids. And then came home, and it was a normal evening of, school, homework, catching up with whatever had happened in the day for James work-wise, and for me doing teas and whatever and dealing with the kids. And it wasn't until about 8, 9 o'clock in the evening that we finally had a couple time to sit down and actually process and discuss what we had been told. That was difficult in itself. And then obviously because of James and his role and the situation that was happening over in Northern Ireland at the time.
I should say it was quite a tricky time in terms of talks that were going on, another political crisis in Northern Ireland. And at one stage, actually, people were asking me, where is he? Why is he not in Northern Ireland? And actually, he was receiving treatment.
Yeah, and we then had to actually tell the then Prime Minister, Theresa May, James's condition and his news before we actually told the wider family, because of the situation and the circumstances.
That's such a weird position to be in,
yeah.
Cathy, where you're telling the Prime Minister of the country, James's boss essentially at the time, before you're telling the wider. I mean, that sort of sequencing of events, who you tell when, and then of course it went from being very private to very, very public. What was that like? Yeah. That bit. What was that like for you?
It was difficult. I mean, as I say, my main protection was, my concern was to protect the kids. And we were a very close family of 5. I now have an incredibly close family of 4, obviously because James has sadly passed away. and you're trying to process stuff. And it's just simple things. James was in the public eye, and you'd want to walk out the door. And obviously, James, it's well publicised, he had lung cancer, and part of his treatment is exercise and being healthy and walking. So we'd go out and walk outside the front door. The sun was shining. It's a way of relaxing for most people, listening to nature, the birds, looking at the scenery. And because we're living in the community that James represents, people would come up and ask questions and ask how he was. But obviously what they hadn't realised is 3 minutes before on a different street, we'd been asked the same question. You might pop out for an hour's walk and be asked 5, 6, 7 times, how are you?
And that comes from a really good place, Cathy, doesn't it? Those people want to be nice, and I'm sure, you know, we've already seen all the well-wishers on social media. Princess Kate will be getting thousands of cards and messages and so on. She has people to deal with that. She has a correspondence unit and people to protect her from that. But and you had a couple of people around you, but really at the time, because it was so public, that must have been pretty intrusive for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the publicity creeps up on you with the job anyhow. So you're kind of used to being in the public eye. We never expected that James would have lung cancer because he was a never smoker. And it does add another layer of sort of another layer that other people just don't have to deal with. But at the end of the day, you can't change that. You just have to deal with it. James then obviously quickly realised that he could try and harness this and use it for good. I mean, we were inundated, as I'm sure Princess Catherine will be, and the King actually, with letters and good wishes and what have you. And that gives you strength in itself. And you hear other stories of people that have been through similar situations. And again, you know that you're not alone.
And those were actually the words. Those were actually the words that Princess Kate used herself. You're not alone. I wonder. You talked about protecting your kids, but what sort of steps did you take to protect your kids when this was all happening? You'd obviously had to protect them in many ways previously, because people make all sorts of assumptions about children of politicians and so on. That's a whole thing in itself. But actually, when the illness is there, what did you do to protect your children?
Ultimately, you have to be honest. I mean, for us, it was being honest with the children and explaining the situation. And it was incredibly hard. It will be incredibly hard for any family that is going through a cancer diagnosis. It's going to be 1 in 2 people these days, which actually then means when you take the wider family, whether it's your son, your mother, your daughter, your cousin, your aunt, it's most probably every family is impacted with cancer. And for us, trying to protect the children was being honest with them. And therefore, because it was in the public eye, if somebody came up to them and talked to them and asked them questions, it didn't come as a shock.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, every family navigates it in their own way and what they think is best. As I say, for James, when he realised the outpouring, he knew that he could try and harness this and raise awareness. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since he's passed away. For me, I find comfort in the fact that if I can help another family that's going through this, whether they're in the public eye or not, and in turn help save lives.
And that's what you've done, Cathy. That's what you've done with the Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation. Tell us about your work with them.
Yeah, I've now become an ambassador and a trustee for Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation, which I have found massively rewarding. And I've actually come across people that have seen me do interviews in the past where I'm talking about symptoms and awareness, and they've then gone and seek help with a doctor. And they basically have been sadly diagnosed with lung cancer, and they wouldn't be alive today had they not heard my words, which is so rewarding, and it just inspires you to keep going. And as I say, I mean, Kate, we don't know what type of cancer she's got, but there are so many generic symptoms of various cancers, and that's whether it's the fatigue, it's the loss of weight, something not feeling right. And it's not only you yourself recognising that. I mean, we spend a lot of time with our work colleagues, we spend time with our friends, and if somebody just mentions, I'm not feeling well, or you notice that there's something different about them, and it's something that you're happy to talk about, and it's been going on for 3 weeks or more, I just urge anyone to go seek help, because early diagnosis is the key, and the prognosis can be completely different if you get that early diagnosis.
It's great work, Cathy. And just finally, before you go, I know from one Catherine to another, there is something, when you're Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, there's a lot of sacrifices you make. It's a very unpopular job. It's a very difficult Northern Ireland. Politics is very tricky. You make a lot of enemies. A lot of people don't like you very quickly, although James was almost universally loved, even by his political so-called enemies. But there's a great bit about being Northern Ireland Secretary that you get, and Princess Kate has access to it too. And I know you want to give her just a little pointer on this front of a little bit of an idea of somewhere which might be nice to go.
I would never be on a position to recommend a royal what to do. However, I have been privileged and lucky enough to stay at Hillsborough Castle, which is a royal palace. And I would strongly recommend, if Princess Kate and Prince William and their family can go to Hillsborough Castle and stay there. James and I found solitude in walking in the gardens. There is something magical about that place, and I know the current king is very fond of Hillsborough Castle, so that would be my bit of advice. If she can take time out and has the space to go, I recommend her to go visit Hillsborough Castle and stay there. Definitely.
Excellent. Members of the public can go in as well. I spent lots of time in the gardens there. Cathy, thank you very much. Thanks for speaking so honestly and openly to us. You're a great friend, and I appreciate you coming on. Cathy Brokenshire there, whose husband James Brokenshire MP was a Conservative MP who had lung cancer and very sadly died in 2021.